Okay, we're here with St. Mary's County Commissioner Mike Hewitt, who's running for a third term, representing the Lexington Park, Hollywood area. Mike, would you please explain your background to the viewer in terms of your personal, business, professional, and political experience?
Sure. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate this opportunity. I moved here with my family in 1963. I was 10 years old. My dad got stationed in Patuxent River. It was his last duty station. He went in World War II, part of that greatest generation Tom Brokaw talked about. The Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor and he wanted to go. Well, now, 20-some years later, here we are. We land in St. Mary's County. Well, that was February 1st, 1963. I just turned 10. Went to St. Michael's to start with, then moved over to Piney Point, went to Piney Point Elementary, Esperanza Middle, Great Mills High School, graduated St. Mary's College, worked for my dad in the family business. He ran it for 15 years, and on his sudden death, I ran it after that for 38 years.
Do you remember the opening day of Red Chevron?
Sure I do. Well, let's just say there was plenty of great days to remember. I have to say that I remember my dad in 1963 saying that he didn't like the new Navy and that he was going to get out of the Navy. And he thought St. Mary's County was a wonderful place to retire. He was still young because you did 20 years in the Navy. He was, I think, 38 years old when he got out. And the bottom line was that he had done his time, 37. Anyway, bottom line was he got out and didn't like the new Navy, decided to get into business, and was able to get in with Stewart Petroleum Company, a local petroleum nearby in Jobber. And he bought a business out in Bushwood, out at, we used to call it Chaptico Road, but it's Route 238 and 242. It's now Hills Service Center. We were there for a couple of years, and in May of '66, he got the opportunity to open a brand new gas station at the corner of Chances Run Road and 235. Still remember that day like yesterday. It was a bright, sunny day like it was just yesterday, and we got there, and Lord knows we were busy, and he was just as happy as can be. And I remember he was 39 and I was 13, and I remember my dad telling me, "Son, this is the greatest day." He said, "The world's our oyster." He said, "We got a brand new facility. We got a 20-year lease." He said, "We just got a growing community." He said, "All we have to do is work." Well, I'd gotten up at 5 a.m. that morning because at that time, if you were 13 years old and your dad had a business, you went with him. All I knew was a lot of work, but it was good. And I have to say, retail was a type of business where you met a lot of people, gave you a lot of exposure to different attitudes, different backgrounds. We were military to start with, but we quickly became county. Now, I ended up going to Great Mills, and again, I graduated there, proud, Great Mills Hornets. Ended up down at St. Mary's College. Did meet my wife in college, but I met her in Baltimore. And the point was, we ended up moving here, and I went to work for my father, and we got married, started a family. My dad died suddenly in 1981 from some elective surgery, and he ran the business for about 15 years, and then I ran it for 38 years after that. In 1990, when my kids were young, they were in elementary school, there were some issues going on with the Board of Education and teachers. The Board of Education had reneged on teacher raises, and they couldn't do them because there have been some changes in the state legislature. Well, that got me involved because I was very worried about my kids, their education. So sure enough, 1989, I showed up to a meeting at Leonardtown Middle School, and Superintendent Joan Kozlowski, after having an opportunity to speak, said, "I want you on our Budget Advisory Committee." So I served on the Budget Advisory Committee, and was on that for about 5 years. In 1994, late in 94, I was appointed to the St. Mary's County Planning Commission. And I did that for about 16 months until 1996, when the first elected school board in over 100 years was elected. And I was fortunate enough to get elected to that school board. My good friend Mary Washington was also elected that year. She still serves to this day. God bless her. So I did 4 years on the Board of Education, as I say, and it was a very eye-opening experience. And after 4 years, I decided I wanted to move on. So I ended up serving 5 years on the Board of Appeals, another eye-opening experience. You see a lot of things to do with land use, and honestly, it was probably the best board, Planning Commission, Board of Education, of the 3 boards that I had served on up to that time. Well, then I took some time off, ran my business, raised my family, and in 2014, I decided to run for County Commissioner. I ran for County Commissioner for District 2, Hollywood-Leonardtown. I live in Hollywood. I've lived there now for probably about 42 years, 43 years. And after I was successful in 2014, I came onto the Board of County Commissioners. Governor Hogan, thank him very much. He appointed me to the Critical Areas Commission for the state of Maryland. I'm currently the Critical Areas Commissioner for St. Mary's County. He also appointed me to the Patuxent River Commission, which I'm no longer the commissioner for. I served 1 term there. But they were again, more eye-opening experiences, more exposure to how land use and how the state government and the county government and actually the federal government work together. And then I ran again for re-election in 2018. I was successful with that re-election, and now I'm up for my 3rd and final term. I hope to be successful in November, but you know, it's up to the voters. And the good news is there's a lot of choices, and that's the best thing about government is voters get to make the choice.
Have you found it a real challenge to hold down taxes as a commissioner since 2014?
It's always a challenge to balance the needs of what people say they need and what you have to offer. But St. Mary's County has been amazingly lucky. Now, I use the term lucky because we have this Patuxent Naval Air Station out here. And what's happened with that over the years, it's continued to grow. It's continued to have jobs come in. And what I know from my business background as being a small business owner, and what I really take from that is how hard it was to come by some of the money you had to make. I made a statement earlier today that in business, the best compliment you can take is when someone's giving you their check for doing their repair or whatever service you did for them, and they say thank you for doing this. That is the highest compliment. But what I understood about that was the need for customer service. So I brought that same quality, I think, to the Board of County Commissioners, and it's about customer service. The best part of this job is constituent service. But to answer your question, what I've found is we've been lucky that we've been getting additional revenues because of the rising salaries on the Navy base. And then the complementary contractor community that's grown up around the base. And then that in turn leads to good small businesses that tend to do well if they have good services. That's also brought in big box stores. It's increased our real estate base. So what we've been able to do is we've been able to get the funding we need, the revenue growth we need, provide the services we need, and not raise taxes. And I'm proud of that.
The idea of having charter government has come up 3 times to referendum, and it's been defeated 3 times. And yet we still have a commissioner today talking about it. Do you favor charter government?
Here's what I would say to you. I favor whatever the voters of St. Mary's County want to do. Now, twice we brought it up, and twice it's been soundly defeated. I didn't vote for it when we had the referendum last time, or the vote for the referendum. It's 4-1. The meetings I went to were lightly attended, and people were very vocal against changing our form of government. I think we have to come up with a very good reason to change what we've been doing for as long as we've been doing it. Now, on the downside, or not, I shouldn't say the downside, but on the other side, which one of the issues with county government that makes it tough is our staff. Look, we have great people, and they're doing great jobs, but they have 5 bosses. And what's really important is to have a commissioner president or leadership that knows how to poll the commissioners and gain 3 votes. One thing about this commissioner government, as I like to call it, it's a count to 3. If you can get a majority of the commissioners to want to do something, then that's what should happen. Now, what can be an issue is when you have one commissioner or 2 commissioners join and want to have something happen. Well, the staff, they have to respond to their bosses. So they will react to that. And maybe not all the time, that's to the best.
In the early 90s, the St. Mary's County Commissioners appointed a space needs study.
Yes.
And they came up with a proposal for a $23 million judicial palace here at Leonard Hall at the Governmental Center. The commissioners in '95 initially embraced that. Senator Roy Dyson killed it when he killed the bond bill, and the commissioners are very indignant about it. Within 6 months, 3 of the commissioners changed their minds and decided to keep the courthouse and voted to expand it and renovate the existing 1901 courthouse. Now you have in your capital budget over $700,000 in the next fiscal year for a $26 million sheriff's palace, which is $26 million. I mean, that's real bucks. And it appears you'd have not appointed a citizens committee to review, revise, or recommend this. Do you plan on bringing public input into that, or are you just going to let the bureaucrats decide what their palace should look like and then give the bill to the taxpayers?
Well, let me back up for a minute. I think that the idea that the bureaucrats were behind that isn't really the truth. What I would say to you is that what happened is we did a space needs study. And look, I'm all in favor of
Who's
citizens.
the we?
The county government.
Okay.
We were tasked when the last term, their first term, with trying to identify where we would grow as we're growing as a county and we'll have to grow as a government. And what we've had many issues with, whether it be EMS, fire, whether it be the sheriff's department. Bottom line is this. What we need to do is we need to identify what we need. So we had this space needs study, and it came up with needing additional space for the sheriff. Now, one commissioner in particular took it upon himself to push for the sheriff's headquarters. That wasn't always the idea of all the commissioners, and I'm not going to get into who did and who didn't. I'm just going to say this. The sheriff has come to us and said, I'm busting at the seams. So what we said was, we'll take your existing building, we'll move land use and growth management out, we'll move recreation and parks out, we'll move the treasurer's office out and find new spaces for them. And we'll give you the whole building. Well, it sounded like a good idea, but then they talked about blast force or some kind of terrorist protection to keep somebody from driving up in front of it with a rental truck full of fertilizer like they did in Oklahoma City so many years ago.
Really? They really came up with that?
Well, let's just say that was one of the reasons that a building with such close proximity to parking was probably not a good idea. They needed an idea that, they needed a building, a structure that would be remote from that.
Maybe they would need Humvees to drive around instead of police cars, too.
Listen, let's just say this. The police have a tough job.
That's pretty ridiculous.
Well, I have to say this. I support the men and women in blue. Look, that's a tough job, and it's a job I wouldn't want to do. And thank God we have them to do it.
Okay, well, if you have a bigger building for more people to be in, how are they going to be out fighting crime unless crime is taking place in the building?
Well, let's talk about that a minute.
Okay.
Now, what this commissioner board and then the previous one has supported is what we call community policing. And we've had these substations placed, one in Lexington Park on Great Mills Road, one in Wildwood, one in Charlotte Hall. And the idea is that the police will be out policing, that they won't be stuck in headquarters. So back to your question about do we need a $26 million headquarters? I'd say to you, I don't know. I would say to you this. I think it's definitely something that the public should input on. And it's the $700,000 that you're talking about, Ken, is money that we've put aside to do a evidence storage because they are in a tough need for an armory and places to put stuff that they have, that they're accumulating. I have seen it. And if you haven't been there, hopefully they let you in and show it to you.
No, we had that problem before when the assistant sheriff gave away a tractor trailer load of seized evidence to his stepson and to his buddy because they didn't have a place to put it. So I can see the need for a secure place to put evidence.
But what we're doing in that regard is we're doing it in phases.
Mm-hmm.
The first phase being the evidence storage, the storage for an armory for the weapons and stuff they confiscate. And I'll use the term, I support that.
Well, since it's in stages, isn't there still time to bring in some citizens to be on a committee to evaluate it?
I think we'll go in that direction. Mm-hmm. Look, there's going to be a new board in about, first Monday in December of this year. That'll be a great topic for a new board to come up.
Okay, you're going to be on that board with any luck. Will you recommend that, bringing in public involvement?
Yes.
Okay.
Look, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is.
And the key gets to be is, okay, let's see what we have and what needs to be done.
You spent $6 million on the sheriff's station in Lexington Park, Great Mills Road, which from what I can see is to give them a secure facility to use a bathroom so they don't have to go to Wawa. That would have paid for 41 deputies.
Here's what I would say to you. The issue with that is that you have capital money and then you have recurring operating money. Now, if you were to take $6 million and put it into deputies, I'm not saying that's a bad idea.
Yeah, but taxpayers look at it all coming out of their pocket.
Oh, I agree.
You divvy it up in these different places, and the taxpayers are going, wait a minute, we have crime, we need more deputies, and you build a building.
Well, here's what I would say to you.
Okay.
Once you build the building, you don't have to build it again. Once you pay the salary, that comes every year.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do in county government is give steps. People deserve it. We've worked hard to make sure that our deputies, our correctional officers, our law enforcement is adequately compensated given what's going on with neighboring counties.
Okay, well,
we do not lose deputies to neighboring counties.
And I realize you're not running for sheriff, so let me ask you this question. You all focused on the problem of the Wuhan flu, COVID pandemic, whatever you want to call it. And one of the biggest ways it affected the county is it exposed the fact that we had all these wonderful volunteers with the rescue squads. Now we're among your most endangered people and afraid to go on calls. And it really stressed out your local volunteer rescue squads. And you all came to bat, as I understand it, and started funding EMTs on a paid basis and found mechanisms to pay for it. Could you describe a little bit more about that?
Let me back up just for a second there. You made the remark about the sheriff's department, which honestly I support the men and women in blue.
You are running for sheriff?
No, I'm not. But what I'll say to you this is that the sheriff has his own constituency. Mm-hmm. We've had a great sheriff for 16 years. But now we have a choice for a new sheriff. Voters will have a chance to look at 3 different men who are running for that position and make their decision. My point as a county commissioner, I'm not an expert on law enforcement. They should be. I hope they are. But I think as someone who collects taxes, sets tax rates, actually collects the revenues and pays the expenses, when we identify new money, typically about 20% of it goes, 20% of our budget goes to law enforcement. And that what we should do is not get involved in, are they buying cars, or are they hiring people, or are they doing whatever they're doing. I really believe what we should do is find out how much money is available, give it to the sheriff, for him, that person, to decide what their priorities are, and for them to make those decisions. Because if they're not wise decisions, then people can influence that position in the next election. We are not in the business of telling the sheriff, you need cars, you need equipment, you need whatever you need. The sheriff can do that for themselves. So I'd like to do what I call a paradigm shift. People will say, Mike, what's a paradigm shift? It's like being in a poker game having 4 kings, but the guy next to you has 4 aces. You may have a good hand, but if you knew the guy had 4 aces, you wouldn't bet it. Back to a paradigm shift. It means that we get away from telling people like the Board of Education how many teachers to hire, or the state's attorney what to do with, their blackboards or whatever equipment they need, or the sheriff's department where they tell them how many cars they should have, or what kind of armaments they should buy, or those types of things, and get back to the issue of governance, running county government and providing services.
But don't you have accountability back to the taxpayers?
Oh, absolutely.
Like when the state's attorney went off to a conference in Ocean City and spent $11,000 that you all funded it. And he says that was for staff training for a conference that was canceled.
Look, again, voters have a chance to make their feelings known this November. Now, when we give them that money, we don't put strings on it you can and can't do. And they, especially someone like a lawyer, an attorney, in charge of a division like that, will understand what they can and can't do.
Okay, how about the EMTs? Can I bring you back to that?
Yeah, please. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked.
Okay.
Here's what I would say to you. I've been in St. Mary's County going on 60 years. This is my home. I've known many people who have volunteered for rescue squads, fire departments, and God bless them, thank God we have them. But we all know it's usually the people who don't have to work during the day. It's the volunteers that you get after people have retired. Those were the people most susceptible to the COVID-19 pandemic, and they did not come in. Now, we have experienced having to hire career people to do that job, especially rescue, fire and rescue. Fire, not so much, but the rescue squads. But that is going to be another big growth in government. And what I mean by that is, you're talking fully staffed $6 million a year. Now we're biting it off in increments. We used to have volunteers who would run 80-90% of the calls, and we had to have careers for maybe 10%, mainly advanced life support. But what we're experiencing now is that because of the pandemic, the volunteers are not coming back. You also have employers who don't want their employees volunteering on the rescue squads, because if they get COVID out there and they come to work, they challenge that workforce. So let's understand the reality is we're trying to bite this off in chunks. Last year we hired, I think, 38. This year we got another 26 or so. We're probably going to have to hire more. But it's not something we can do overnight. And we have to, and honestly, I really hope we can look at our LOSAP, which is our Length of Service Awards program, where we pay out benefits to people who volunteer. And then maybe we can raise that amount of payout and have those people want to come back.
How is the billing for insurance companies working out?
Well, let's say this. I am impressed with it. Now, we started out with an estimate of about $1.5 million, and that was as far as revenue coming in, and about a 50% penetration rate, because we have what's called a soft billing policy. So if you've been billed 3 times and you can prove that you can't afford to pay it, we're not going to go after your credit. But what we have found is that insurance companies are used to paying this fee. It's been something we've taken for granted. A free ambulance ride is something now that is paid for almost nationwide.
So overall, your experience with it, are you happy with the way it's worked out and the challenge that you had?
Here's what I'd say to you, Ken. What we've been able to do from September to April, we've collected over $800,000. I think over the course of a year, we'll exceed 1.5. That'll offset the amount of money we have to pay or we have to take out of the general fund. And I am optimistic about that.
Are you also investing in vehicles or using the ones that were already in place?
Well, look, the ones that are already in place have to be used, but there are additional ones that need to be invested in. We need ones here at the governmental center so the crew out of the emergency services can operate when we're centrally located in Leonardtown. So when we have someone who can't respond, whether it be in the Charlotte Hall area, the Valley Lee area, the Ridge area, that you can send somebody out. So we have invested in 2, if not 3. We've been lucky enough to get one for the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home, which again has its own needs. So yes, we have invested in some.
Okay. Moving on to a couple other issues. We had this pot factory farm in Abell that people are just astounded that all of a sudden it grows out of a field, and it makes me wonder if everybody in the 7th District got beamed up into a UFO and nobody noticed it being built. So people are really hot about it, and especially because it's in a residential neighborhood in the critical areas. And as you said, you're on the Critical Areas Commission. Can you tell us how this is developed without public hearings? And then Commissioner Guy says, well, that's what you're going to do on May 9th, is have a public hearing to set up policies. But looking to this whole thing right now, I can see that virtually any neighborhood and area of the county could have the same thing happen tomorrow.
Yes. I am the commissioner for the Critical Areas Commission. And I got to be honest with you, I got a call from Howie Guy at Napa Auto Parts out there in the 7th and Clements back in the first part of March. He said, Mike, I found out you're the commissioner. How did you allow this to happen? I said, Howie, I don't think I know what you're talking about. He says, you got to come out here and look at it. I drove out there and looked at it the next day, and I was astounded. I was appalled. I could not believe that somehow a permit had been allocated for a facility that's 52,850 square feet. That's in the critical area. And then there's another, what I really don't know yet is what the total approvals have been. Now, again, I'm a commissioner. I'm on the Critical Area Commission. I should have known about this. Now, I know there's one commissioner who went to the Land Use Department in 2016. Because once I found out about this, I said, wait a minute now. I went right to the Critical Areas Commission. How in the world did we allow this? How did the Critical Areas Commission allow this? Now understand something. I'm a commissioner, but I don't work for the commission. And the commission does thousands of critical area variances and cases a year. And that staff works within the county staff, whether it's St. Mary's, Dorchester, Calvert, whoever has critical areas. And the point is, I don't know what those people are doing unless they courtesy copy me, and they don't. They will in the future. I've asked for that now. For anything to do with St. Mary's County, you can do it electronically. I will be copied. So with that said, I said, how in the world did this get approved in St. Mary's County? They said, well, Department of Agriculture approved the use. Go talk to them. So I went to the Department of Agriculture. Very nice lady there. She said, look, you got to look at your own planning director. I said, our own planning director? She said, yes. She said, what the state of Maryland did, they passed medical marijuana, and they passed the ability to have processing plants, grow plants, in the state of Maryland. And they approved 22 of them. In your county, you have a resident who applied for one.
Okay. Specifically, you were talking about the permitting process and
Yes.
going back to the land use and growth management. Could you continue?
Well, I asked staff to look into this, and they got back to me and said that in 2016, a commissioner came to them at land use. It was Phil Shire, Kathleen Easley, Harry Knight, and Bill Hunt, and said, this is coming, and we want to be in We want St. Mary's County to be on the ground floor. Now, what they talked about was there was two uses it could be: agricultural minor or agricultural major. Agricultural major was a processing plant where you actually process the material. And agricultural minor would be where you grow it. Now, the difference is agricultural major requires planning commission approval, public hearing notice, notice to neighbors, critical area approvals, also multiple approvals by multiple agencies. The bottom line is the other one, agricultural minor, does not require any of those. Doesn't require notice to anybody. And our planning director at the time decided that that was probably the best way to go. That man was Phil Shire. I'm not trying to throw people under the bus. These are the people who were there in 2016. Now, Phil Shire retired in January of 2017. This permit was allocated in July of 2018. So that was still in my first term, at the end of it, during election year. Now, what I was disappointed, and I'm disappointed to this day, is that that director at the time, who had had the position then at that 2018, and also concerned that the county administrator didn't bring it to the commissioners and say, I've got two choices. One requires review, one requires no review. Commissioners, what would you like me to do? Granted, it's the director's prerogative to do what they want to do or make the choice that they make. And if they can say I made the right choice, who am I to say they didn't? But I'll say this. I was blindsided by it. Now, there's different people talk about their military careers and stuff. I know if someone blindsided a colonel or a general, there would be repercussions. This is not acceptable. Now, what we're talking about doing in May is the Planning Commission. What we did, back up for a second, a couple weeks ago, the county commissioners made a motion that future operations of this type, cannabis grow operations, cannabis processing operations, would have to come under review by the Planning Commission, and that amendments would be taken up, and maybe potentially additional regulations, additional steps, additional hoops to jump through would be required of anybody wanting to do it new. This commissioner doesn't think it's fair. Look, if someone else is doing it and didn't have to do all that, why does the next guy? So we've been put in, what Mike Hewitt's term is, we've been put in a conundrum. We've got a situation where we've allowed something that multiple commissioners didn't even know about. Now we're going to start putting rules and regulations on it after someone's already got a benefit. Someone didn't have to do that. It's not fair. And if anything we should be in government, we need to be fair. So look at this, absolutely. Figure out how it happened, absolutely. Try to understand why it made sense to put it in a critical area. I don't think there's any sense to be made of that. What they did in the rest of the state of Maryland, they allowed each county to decide its own zoning regulations and where these facilities would be placed. Calvert County doesn't want any. Now, what the state of Maryland did say, look, it's coming. It's mandated. If someone wants to do it in your county, they can sue and they will probably win. But what the state of Maryland also said is you can do your own zoning regulations. This use, I read in the paper, Southern Maryland News a while back, is expected to have 100 employees. One commissioner said he sees maybe 300 employees. That system out there they have to use a septic system, and they're using a mound system, which is very fragile, and it's right on the water. It makes no sense. It is not good land use. It belongs in an industrial area with water and sewer, so you can provide the water and make sure you know how much it's taking. You can treat the sewage with the sewer, and if you're gonna have 100 people, you cannot have that, or you should not have that type of business in the critical area on a mound system in a fragile environment.
The company that runs that, they've already been fined by the state pot cannabis commission for illegally transferring ownership back and forth, where the law requires them to get approval ahead of time. So they've already been hit with fines and dinged with the violations. Does it concern you as to who is actually behind this?
No.
Should the public be concerned?
Well, let's just say it's probably some degree of transparency in who owns it, even though I'm not really sure about that. I'm not really worried about who the owners are. What I'm worried about is A, the location, and B, the transparency of the process to get it approved. Those are the number one and two things. The owners, who cares? People want to do that stuff. It's like Elon Musk, and he can get an electric car that works well and people want to buy it. God bless them. The medical benefits, if they're out there, I know this myself. If I had a family member that needed something like that and I had to find it somewhere, I would go find it for them. So as far as the medical benefits and who the owners are, no problem.
Well, let me fly you to a different subject. The county airport. Okay, it's been a yacht club for the aeronautically inclined for a long time. Okay, if you have a private plane, you got a place with the county. You know, it's like, what do you do if your yacht or your boat? But it's called a regional airport, and for good reason. It's never had a scheduled flight. The sheriff, he sends a couple of his guys up to Toronto, Canada to get training for their canine dogs to sniff a bomb. The previous commissioners prior to you all spent $3 million, got a grant to build a waiting room and terminal. There's never been a scheduled flight. No passengers ever sat in one of those rows of chairs. Okay, and now you're extending the runway to take in larger planes. But I'm told that you'll still never have any flights to BWI from here. So what's the point? Why are we expanding at taxpayer expense the runways, or are you getting federal grants to do that?
No, we are getting federal grants, and usually it's 90% of whatever the cost is. So it's a great deal. 5% state, 5% county. I totally support what's going on at the airport. Now let me back up for a second. My wife and I ran a Hertz car rental agency for, over 20 years. And the point of that is that the Navy base did so much travel down here. And people did travel too. Now, where'd they do a majority of the Navy base travel went to? They went to the airports. When they went to Baltimore, when they went to BWI or Dulles, they took those cars, and it was a glorified taxi service to the airports. I'd say that was probably 80% of the government travel we did. And of the travel we did, government was probably 80 to 90% of our business. It wasn't a lot of leisure. But where I'm getting at is this, Ken. The issue that made commuter travel not, what's the term? You couldn't make any money on it. It didn't make it worthwhile to do. Was because you couldn't do air flights out of St. Mary's County Airport, say hourly, because it wasn't cost effective. You didn't have travelers. And the people on the base were required to find the cheapest way to get to wherever they had to go. They had to take the lowest carrier. So to take an airplane out of St. Mary's, whether it be to BWI, Dulles, National, was going to be more expensive than going by Hertz car rental, Avis car rental, any of the car rentals, getting a car for $50, taking it up to the airport, dropping it off. Then they got their flights and went whatever. But the other key is if you're going to have this type of a service, you have to be able to take people from point A to point B and point B back to point A. Let's say from here to the airports and the airports back to here. So what the key was, if someone got into one of the airports, the major airports, 3 major airports, and there was a carrier coming back to St. Mary's County that was maybe an hour or 2 or 3 hours layover, they just hopped in a car and drove home. So it was not economical from the standpoint of a commuter airport. There was also something that a guy named Cass Taylor, I think a senator from out in western Maryland, when they put in this regional bill.
Speaker of the House.
Sorry, sir.
He was Speaker of the House General Assembly. Yeah.
Well, that may have been.
You're close. He was from western Maryland.
But it may have been before my time. I don't know. It was a while back.
That was him.
But the bottom line is what he did is he made these rules only for airports that were in Maryland. So the only one that was affected was BWI. So this regional business, I mean, they could fly to Eastern Maryland, they could fly to Ocean City, or they could fly to, I guess, Hagerstown or someplace. But the key was it wasn't economically viable. So back to the airport. What we've been able to do out there, which I think is excellent, is we've been able to glean stuff off the base, technology off the base that can be developed to the drone program, the UAS program. That's a great one. And also what we've been able to do is get foreign governments, whether Costa Rica, Colombia, different parts of the, what we want to call that area, South America, Central America, to bring their planes up here because they deal with older planes. Now, our airport runway needed to be extended. What we've done out there is we've developed a business that works on these types of planes, whether they come from those countries in Latin America or South America, and they refurbish them. They put new electronics in them. And by having that longer airport, that longer runway, we've been able to enlarge the size of the plane we can take. Now, we're also set up to do most of what you see out there going on today is private investment. And I use the term public-private partnerships. It's good for us to have the airport, but it's better when someone else builds it, pays the taxes on it.
Bildman, he's built most of those hangars out there, hasn't he?
Well, I think Steve Bildman's no longer there.
But he did over the years.
I think a man named Ken Reed has been involved in that. Anyway, people have taken a chance. It was a chance to build those hangars. And what's unique about St. Mary's County Airport is we can still fly in the area where so much around Washington, D.C. is restricted because they don't want to take the chance of a terrorist getting a small plane and, God forbid, blow something up at the White House or somewhere in Washington. So we have this niche, is my term, that allows us to make that a viable use.
Okay. On to the Board of Education. Half the budget of the county goes to them, or
Yes,
more, maybe more than half.
Well, 46%.
Okay. So in the past 2 years, they've lost 800 students less, but they want more money. How does that work, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, look, here's the thing I have to say about the Board of Ed. I spent 4 years on the Board of Education. Now, people will say, Mike, that was 20 years ago, and it was. But the key is kids are kids. Teachers are teachers. Teachers want to teach. We need to support teachers the best we can, and thank God we have funded their negotiated agreements. We fully funded the negotiated agreement this time. What I would say to you, one of the challenges of education, and they have had over the last 8 years, is what I call flat enrollment. They've expected higher numbers of students and they haven't gotten it. Well, 20-some years ago, we used a term called live birth rate. So if a baby was born today, 6 years from now, that child should be entering first grade. That's not happening. Now, you got to understand what's happening. We've had parochial. That's really gone up. We've had homeschooling. That's increased. So people are taking a look at public education and trying to understand if it's right for them. That's a good thing because school choice is a parental right. Who educates your child is definitely a parental decision. Now, we have a thing called a Kerwin Commission. What's good about St. Mary's County is we've been able to overfund above maintenance of effort. We've consistently, this year we're over $6 million over what is required by maintenance of effort. Now people will say, Mike, what's maintenance of effort? Well, that's when you count the number of children you have and you say, okay, you're going to have $8,000, $9,000 per child. And you have to give that exact amount next year. You can never give less than you gave last year. This Board of Commissioners for 7 years in a row, actually 8 now, has given more than the maintenance of effort. Now, I'm not trying to say that it's a good thing, a bad thing, but we need to support education. So I'll say that I'm a big supporter of the teachers and the people who have to actually deliver. They've been challenged with this virtual education. They're tired. They've been doing so much. And the parents, the good news is our kids are back in school. And thank God.
Is there another issue that we haven't talked about that you'd like to before we end the interview?
Here's what I'd like to say to you, Ken. Thank you for this opportunity. Now, this job as a county commissioner is important. It needs people who understand St. Mary's County. I tell people it doesn't need to be Mike Hewitt. It doesn't need to be me. But it needs to be someone who understands St. Mary's County is diverse, but it's all one. There's a difference between Ridge and the 7th District, between Golden Beach and Valley Lee, between Lexington Park and Leonardtown. It's not a bad thing. We are a microcosm of the country. We are made up of different people with different ideas. And the bottom line is, before you can fix anything, you've got to know it. I'd say anybody who wants to be a commissioner should have been involved in some type of a board, some board of education, some board of appeals. Apply for something so you know something about how government works. That'll make you most effective.